More breaking news on the war in Iran. New blistering Israeli strikes in Lebanon hours after President Trump notified Congress the war was effectively over. The AP reports at least 7 people were killed in those strikes, adding the Israeli military also separately demolished parts of a Catholic convent in a border village. Israel claims it targeted Hezbollah military infrastructure. The war is now in its 61st day with no end in sight after Trump rejected Iran's latest response to U.S. peace proposals. And this just in, a senior foreign diplomat in Tehran linked to negotiations tells MS Now contributor Inzamam Rashid, Iranians expect hostilities will resume. The source, who spoke on a condition of anonymity given the sensitivities of the matter, added the American tone is changing, as too is the Israelis, and the emphasis is not on negotiating from the U.S. side anymore. Joining me now, Suzanne Kianpour, journalist, founder of Helmet to Heels and co-host of the Global Power Shifts podcast, and Nancy Youssef, staff writer with The Atlantic covering national security and the Defense Department. Welcome to you both. So, Suzanne, how do you interpret this idea that Iran expects hostilities to resume, and one official adding Iran can't back down and will retaliate?
So we're basically being gaslit by both of these governments, the American government and the Iranian government. The Iranian government can't back down, so to speak, can't let the war end, so to speak, because it's very concerned about another uprising inside the country. The economy is in free fall, and the people inside can't afford to feed themselves. There's water shortages, there's electricity shortages. And so effectively, a war is sort of a way of them being able to possibly control the population. Now, that being said, also, if you end the war with the U.S., that means you're ending 47 years of hostilities with the U.S. And we saw that when the former foreign minister, Javad Zarif, offered this as a solution in Foreign Affairs magazine, he was called a traitor by the IRGC. So there's really no de-escalation happening here. Now, on the American side, President Trump is saying that the war is over because he's looking at midterms and the House was expected to flip. Republicans were expected to lose the House at midterms, but now it looks like the Senate is also at risk.
And Suzanne, quickly, I'm curious about who's actually negotiating on Iran's behalf, considering the killing of the country's top leaders.
Well, the IRGC is in charge, and in a way, we're worse off than we were before. Whereas before, at least, there was some veneer of a kind of balance between the clerics, the mullahs, and the IRGC. But now the IRGC is fully in charge. I mean, we are effectively seeing a ideological military rule over this country.
So, Nancy, the Wall Street Journal reports Iran softened conditions for resuming peace talks, offering to discuss conditions for opening the Strait of Hormuz if the U.S. guarantees to end to attacks and the blockade of Iranian ports. Iran previously wanted the U.S. to drop its blockade as a precondition for talks and agree to end the war before discussions on the Strait and the nuclear program. So, do you see any significance of this apparent softening?
Well, I think so often we talk about the economic stalemate we're in the Strait of Hormuz, but I also think we're facing a diplomatic stalemate. On the Iranian side, they want to build trust, de-escalate, and then start talking about the nuclear program. And the United States wants to talk about the nuclear program first, and then talk about economic and sanctions relief. And so the Iranian willingness to come to the table and talk before the lifting of the blockade was a small concession, but it really didn't deal with that underlying schism between the two sides. And I think that makes it a particularly dangerous point that we're at, because what we're seeing is the potential military escalation and the inability to find a diplomatic off-ramp. And that's what I think they were trying to do, is to find something that would allow them to offer a compromise that was politically palatable to them. But it didn't go far enough for the United States. So we find ourselves not only in an economic stalemate, but now a diplomatic one.
In terms of what's happening inside the country, Suzanne, reports in the Times and the Journal describe economic pain and powerlessness being felt by Iranians. And the Journal says the government has increased the minimum wage. They've raised government workers' salaries. It is subsidizing bread, fuel, and other essentials. And they're also giving cash to the poor and coupons for rice, chicken, and cooking oil. What are you hearing from Iranians coping with not just the economic fallout, but politically as well? I know you touched on the political, but economically, what's it like there right now?
I mean, think about this. So the government has imposed the longest state imposed crackdown, internet shutdown ever in history. So think about economically what that does to people who are reliant on the internet for their livelihoods. And that being said, we also have to think about the fact that places like the UAE has massively cut off the sort of flow of cash for the Iranian regime. So the Iranian regime itself is also running out of money. I mean, I'm getting really heartbreaking voice notes when I can, often through other people, just heartbreaking. I mean, the things that people are starting to resort to, I frankly don't even think I can say on air. I mean, it's really devastating, and it's only going to get worse as summer comes along.
Nancy, you co-wrote this article. It was with MS Now's Jonathan Lemire, that the Iran war's ramifications have only just begun. You report the White House has heard from unhappy Gulf and European allies about the strait's closure and the unwelcome prospect of future Iranian control. Will Hormuz be the lasting legacy of what Trump described at the start as a brief excursion?
So often people talk about the Strait of Hormuz and when it's going to open, and I think we have to think a little bit more nuanced. Before the war, Iran thought that it would be too dangerous to close the strait, and now it's learned that it's a tremendous source of leverage for them. If you're a shipper or a oil producer, you now have to think about a strait that at any time could be closed by the Iranians and have to make adjustments to it. I often compare this to COVID, where supply chains changed after COVID, where we went from just in time supplies to just in case, having excess. That led to a stronger economy, but a costlier one. And I think in the long term, you'll see the same thing happen because of this war, where oil companies will look at maybe building new pipelines or using different ports or even paying fees to the Iranians to transit the strait, because the long-term consequence of this is no longer the assumption that the strait will be free and open for transit, and that for the long-term sake of the world economy, we have to start thinking about alternatives.
Okay, Nancy Youssef, Suzanne Kianpour, ladies, thank you both so much.